After 18 years of what I believed was an unshakable marriage, I discovered that the man I called my closest friend had been slowly, quietly, methodically destroying it from the inside. And when my own brother sat across from me at my kitchen table and told me that I needed to let her go, that she deserved to be happy, something inside me went very still. Not angry, not broken. Still, 3 years later, when they all came crawling back, they found out exactly what kind of man they had underestimated. My name is Daniel Hartley. I am 51 years old. And until the spring of 3 years ago, I thought I had built something real. I grew up in Cincinnati, the kind of city that teaches you the value of showing up. My father worked 30 years at the same machine shop, never complained, never left early. My mother taught 3rd grade and kept the kind of house where neighbors felt comfortable stopping in without calling first. They were not dramatic people. They were steady people. And I became a steady person too, the kind of man who fixes the problem in front of him and moves on to the next one. I met my wife at a friend's cookout the summer after I finished my architecture degree. She was standing near the back fence arguing good-naturedly with someone about whether Chicago deep dish qualified as pizza. She had this way of using her hands when she made a point, like the argument itself needed physical reinforcement. I stood there longer than I should have before anyone noticed me watching. Her name was Caroline. She was working on her physical therapy certification and had what I can only describe as an absolute certainty about things where she stood, what she believed, what she wanted. That certainty drew me in like nothing else ever had. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony outside Columbus. Her father shook my hand at the reception and said, "Take care of her the way she deserves." I told him I intended to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that. I meant it completely. The early years were lean and good in equal measure. I was building my architecture practice from nothing. Hartley design, just me and a drafting table in a rented office the size of a generous closet. Caroline finished her certification and took a position at a rehabilitation clinic on the north side of Chicago, where we had relocated for my work. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment and ate a lot of pasta and went to free concerts in the park on summer evenings. We did not have much. We were not lacking anything that mattered. My best friend's name was Owen Bryce. I had known him since college. We had met the first week of freshman year when we ended up assigned to the same study group for structural engineering. He was not an architect, ultimately. He went into financial consulting, built a comfortable practice advising small and mid-sized businesses. He was charming in that particular way that makes people feel immediately at ease, and he had been in my life so long that by the time I married Caroline, introducing him simply felt like introducing one part of my life to another. He was the best man at our wedding. He gave a toast that made Caroline's mother cry. He sat across from me at Thanksgiving for 16 of the 18 years Caroline and I were married. My younger brother's name is Patrick. He is 7 years younger than me and grew up in my shadow in the way that younger siblings sometimes do, always trying to match a pace he had not set himself. We were not close as children. We became closer as adults, or so I believed. He lived 40 minutes from us in the suburbs, worked in insurance, called on birthdays and major holidays. He and Owen had met through me and developed their own easy friendship over years of family events and shared dinners. I thought that was a good thing. I thought it meant my life was knitted together. I was wrong about so many things. The first sign was something I almost did not catch. I am an architect. My entire professional life is built around the habit of noticing proportions that are slightly off, sightlines that do not align, structural details that seem fine on paper but announce themselves as wrong the moment you stand inside the space. That same habit lives in me outside the office. I notice when things do not fit. It was a Tuesday in February, and I had come home early from a site visit because the subcontractor had canceled. Caroline was not home, which was not unusual. Her clinic hours ran late on Tuesdays. What was unusual was the car in the visitor parking space 2 rows from our building's entrance. A silver Lexus that I recognized because Owen had driven it to our house for New Year's Eve 6 weeks earlier. I stood there in the cold for a moment trying to construct an explanation that made sense. He was not meeting me. He had not called. I went upstairs. Caroline came home 40 minutes later with takeout from the Thai place we liked. She said she had been running errands. She seemed completely normal, asked about my day, complained about a difficult patient, suggested we watch something after dinner. I said nothing. I noted the discrepancy the way I would note a crack in a foundation and began quietly watching for more. Over the next 6 weeks, I found 3 more. A charge on our shared credit card for a hotel in the River North neighborhood on a day when Caroline had told me she was attending a continuing education seminar downtown. The seminar I later confirmed ended at noon. Owen canceling our monthly lunch twice in a row with vague excuses about work pressure, which was unlike him. And a text notification I happened to see flash across Caroline's phone when she left it on the kitchen counter, not the content, just the name, Owen. At 11:47 on a Wednesday night, I am not a man who acts on suspicion. I am a man who acts on information. So I did what I knew I needed to do. I called a colleague who had gone through a messy divorce 2 years earlier and had, in passing, mentioned the name of a private investigator she had used. I met with the investigator, a straightforward woman named Ruth, who worked out of a small office in Wicker Park, and I told her what I needed. She told me she would have something within 2 weeks. She had something in 9 days. She sent me a folder of photographs and a written summary. I opened it at my desk at 6 in the morning before anyone else arrived at the office. The photographs were taken at a hotel in the West Loop. In them were my wife and my best friend of 27 years. The summary noted 3 separate occasions over the past 8 weeks, consistent with a pattern suggesting the relationship had been ongoing for some time. I closed the folder. I sat for a long while looking at the water stain on the ceiling above my desk that I had always meant to have repaired. Then I opened my laptop and sent a message to my attorney. I did not confront Caroline that night, or the next. I needed to know the full shape of what I was dealing with before I showed my hand. I called Ruth back and asked her to dig further, specifically how long this had been going on. What she found, a week later, was that the hotel record she had been able to access suggested at minimum 14 months of consistent activity. 14 months. More than a year of my life reconstructed. I told my brother. I know now that I should not have. But Patrick was the family I had within reach, and I was carrying something I could not hold alone. I called him on a Sunday afternoon and told him what I had found. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When I finished, there was a silence, and then he said something I was not prepared for. "Dan," he said carefully, "are you sure you're not misreading this? Owen's a good guy. He wouldn't." "I have photographs," I said. Another silence. I think you should talk to Caroline before you do anything. Maybe there's more to it than you're seeing." More to it. I let that sit there and did not respond to it. I said I had to go and ended the call. What I did not know then, what I would learn later, was that Patrick had called Owen within an hour of hanging up with me. He told him I knew. He told him I had photographs. He gave Owen the opportunity to prepare. I found this out 6 months later, but I am getting ahead of myself. I confronted Caroline on a Thursday evening. I came home, set my bag down, sat across from her at the kitchen table, and placed the investigator's summary between us. I did not raise my voice. I had made a deliberate decision before walking through the door that I would not raise my voice. I watched her face move through recognition, then fear, then something that looked almost like relief, and that last part was the part that told me everything I needed to know about where we actually stood. She said that she had not planned for it to happen. That Owen had been going through his divorce, yes. Owen had been quietly divorcing for the past 2 years, which I had known, but whose details I had believed were private, and that they had grown close during that time, and that closeness had become something else. She said the words "I still love you," and I noted the past tense she had buried inside what sounded like a present statement. She said she did not want to hurt me. I want to be very clear about what I said next, because it mattered. I said, "You made a choice. I'm going to make one too." I got up from the table, went to our bedroom, and began packing what I needed for the next 2 weeks. She followed me and stood in the doorway, asking me to stay, asking me to talk, telling me we could work through this. I did not answer. I had nothing left to say in that room. I finished packing, carried my bag to the front door, and called my attorney from the parking garage. I stayed at a hotel downtown for 11 days. I used the time well. I met with my attorney twice and left those meetings with a clear picture of where I stood legally. Caroline and I had no children, which simplified the process in one direction and complicated it in another. There was no custody arrangement to negotiate, but there was also no third party whose needs would force practicality into the conversation. What we had was property, finances, and 18 years of accumulated decisions to untangle. On the 12th day, I returned to the house while Caroline was at the clinic. I needed documents for my home office. I had almost everything I came for when I found, in the back of a drawer in the filing cabinet we had always shared, a birthday card in Owen's handwriting. It was dated 4 years earlier, 4 years, not 14 months. The message inside was not explicit in the way that would have made it simple. It was worse than that. It was the kind of intimate shorthand that develops between two people who have been sharing something private and significant for a long time. Inside jokes I did not understand. References to places I had not been with her. A sentence near the bottom that said, "You know, I've always known we weren't done. 4 years. Not 14 months. I stood in my own office with a birthday card in my hand and recalculated 18 years of memory. My brother called while I was still standing there. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to the message later, he said he had spoken to Owen and that Owen wanted to reach out to me and that he hoped I would give him a chance to explain. He said, and I remember this precisely, "He's still your friend, Dan. People make mistakes. I think you should hear him out before you blow everything up." I called Patrick back from the parking garage, sitting in my car with the birthday card in my coat pocket. "You called Owen," I said. "After I told you." A pause. "He's my friend too. I thought maybe if I talked to him." "You warned him," I said. "You called him and told him I had evidence, and you gave him time to prepare." He started to explain. I listened for approximately 20 seconds, and then I said, "I need you to understand something. You were the one person I came to, and you used what I told you to protect him instead of me. I'm going to remember that." I ended the call. The divorce proceedings took 4 months. My attorney was a quiet, methodical man named Frank Delgado who had been practicing family law in Chicago for 22 years and who approached the whole thing the way a surgeon approaches a procedure: no unnecessary motion, no wasted energy. Caroline's attorney pushed for a settlement weighted toward her, given that my architectural practice had grown substantially during our marriage. Frank pushed back. I was entitled to a significant portion of what we had built together, and I took it not out of anger, but because it was fair, and because I had spent 18 years building it and I was not prepared to apologize for that. Owen reached out twice during those 4 months. Once by text, a long message that I read once and did not respond to. Once by calling my office from a number I did not recognize, and when I realized who it was, I said, "Don't contact me again," and hung up. He did not. My brother sent a card around the time the divorce was finalized. Inside he had written that he was sorry, that he had made a mistake, that he hoped I could understand that he had been trying to preserve friendships he valued. I put the card in a drawer and left it there. The year after the divorce was the quietest year of my adult life, and I mean that without any sadness. I moved into a condominium on the north side of Chicago that I had partially redesigned before moving in: new kitchen layout, different window treatments, reconfigured bookshelves, building something with my own decisions in a space that was entirely mine. Felt, unexpectedly, like a form of recovery. I threw myself into the practice. Hartley Design had grown to 8 full-time employees and a reputation for thoughtful commercial and residential work throughout the Midwest. I secured 2 of our largest contracts during that year, including a civic library project in Milwaukee that would become the most recognized work of my career. I did not date. I was not interested in dating. What I was interested in was the work, and the particular satisfaction of showing up every day and doing it well. About 8 months after the divorce, my assistant mentioned that a new client had called requesting a consultation for a residential project, a complete renovation of a mid-century modern house on the North Shore. The client's name was Miriam Solis. She arrived at my office on a Tuesday morning, set a folder of reference images on the table, and told me exactly what she was trying to do and what she was not willing to compromise on. She was 53, recently relocated from Austin, ran a landscape architecture firm of her own. She asked precise questions and listened to the answers the same way. I noticed that we disagreed twice in the first 20 minutes, and the conversation was better for it. We worked together on the project for 9 months. It was professional throughout, and it was also something else: the slow, careful kind of recognition that happens between 2 people who have both been through something significant and have come out the other side more careful with their words and more honest with themselves. Somewhere around the 6th month, she asked if I wanted to have dinner somewhere that wasn't a project site. I said yes. I will tell you what I heard about Owen and Caroline separately, because they happened separately and deserve to be treated that way. Owen lost his two largest clients in the same quarter, 18 months after the divorce. Two different businesses, unrelated circumstances, but the combination gutted his practice financially. The consulting firm he had been quietly building for a decade contracted to 2 employees. He had moved in with Caroline after the divorce was finalized. From what mutual acquaintances told me, and I only heard this because Chicago's professional community is smaller than people assume, the financial stress created tension that neither of them had anticipated. They had built their relationship during a period when both were doing well, and the risk of their choices belonged to someone else. When the risk landed on them, the relationship revealed its actual structure. Caroline called me 14 months after the divorce. I was in Milwaukee for a site inspection, standing on the roof of the library project, watching the framing crew work, when my phone rang with a number I still recognized after all those years. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. I listened to it that evening in my hotel room. She said she wanted to talk. She said things had not worked out the way she had expected. She said she thought about the choices she had made and that she was not sure she had understood fully what she was giving up. She sounded careful and tired. I did not call back. It was not anger that stopped me. Anger would have required more energy than I had to spare for her by then. It was simply that there was nothing left to say that would change the shape of the thing. She had made choices over 4 years that she had the opportunity to reverse at any point. She had not reversed them. Whatever she was not sure about now was, with respect, her own private territory. My brother called 2 months after Caroline did. He called from his personal cell, which meant he had thought about it before dialing. He said he had been thinking about me and that he wanted to get together if I was open to it. He said he understood if I was not. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Tell me something first. If you had that Sunday to do over again the day I called you, what would you do differently?" He was quiet for long enough that I knew he was actually thinking about it rather than reaching for the easiest answer. Then he said, "I would have stayed out of it completely. I should have been your brother, not a middleman." It was not enough to rebuild on immediately, but it was honest, and it was a start. I told him I would think about it and get back to him. I did think about it for several weeks, and eventually I called him back and said we could have dinner. We met at a restaurant halfway between our homes. It was awkward in the way that all honest conversations about hard things are awkward. We left with something slightly better than we had started with, and agreed to try again. I am not going to tell you the dinner was forgiveness. I am going to tell you it was a foundation. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the completed library in Milwaukee at the opening event on a clear October evening and watched people walk through the space I had designed. There is nothing in my professional life that matches that specific moment when a building stops being drawings and becomes a place where real life happens. Miriam was beside me. She had flown up from Chicago for the evening, and she stood with her arm through mine looking at the reading room with the light falling the way I had designed it to fall, and she said, "You built something that's going to outlast both of us." I told her that was the only kind of building worth doing. My practice has tripled in the 3 years since the divorce. We are now 19 employees and operating across 6 states. The library in Milwaukee won a regional award and generated more interest in our work than anything we had produced previously. I moved out of the condo and into a house on the North Shore, not unlike the one Miriam had renovated, actually, though mine needed more structural work and less cosmetic attention. I have been rebuilding the garden in the backyard with the kind of slow deliberateness that feels right for the season of life I am in. On a Friday evening in September, I stood in that backyard with a small group of people, colleagues, friends, Miriam's grown son who had driven down from Wisconsin, and Patrick, who had arrived early and helped me set up the string lights along the fence line without being asked. Miriam gave a short toast. She said she had renovated a house and somehow ended up with a life she had not planned for, and that she found, to her surprise, that the unplanned parts were the ones she valued most. People laughed. I felt the particular gratitude that comes from knowing exactly how much the ordinary moment in front of you cost. Patrick found me by the back fence later in the evening while the rest of the group was still talking. He said, quietly, looking at the garden, "Mom would have loved this place." Our mother had died 6 years earlier, 2 years before any of this had happened. I thought about her in the way I sometimes do, briefly, completely, The way a piece of music can hold an entire feeling in a few bars. She had been, like my father, a steady person. She had believed that integrity was not something you displayed in grand moments, but something you practiced in the ordinary ones, consistently, without looking for credit. She would have had opinions about the plantings, I said. Patrick laughed. It was the most natural thing that had passed between us in 3 years. I got a message from a mutual acquaintance the following week informing me that Owen had relocated to the Pacific Northwest. Caroline, I understood, had gone back to Columbus, where her parents still lived. I read the message and set my phone down and went back to the project I was working on. Their story had become something that happened to other people, in a different chapter, in a book I no longer kept on my shelf. I thought about what my father used to say on the rare occasions when things in our household fell apart: a financial difficulty, a conflict, a disappointment. He would look at whatever it was for a long moment, then say, "All right, what are we going to do about it?" Not what happened to us. What are we going to do about it? I am 51 years old. My architectural practice carries my name on the door and the kind of reputation that took 20 years of consistent work to build. I am in love with a woman who asks precise questions and holds her ground in a disagreement and knows exactly what she is and is not willing to compromise on. My brother and I are still in the early work of rebuilding something. I have a house with a garden that is not finished yet. I did not arrive here because everything worked out. I arrived here because when it fell apart, I made a choice about what to do next. Some foundations, it turns out, can only be built after you have cleared the ground completely. I am still clearing. I am also still building, and for the first time in a long time, those two things feel like exactly the same project.